Today, we're wrestling with a question that, might sound like pure science fiction,
It really does.
but it's driving billions in investment and, frankly, shaping the entire political dialogue of Silicon Valley.
And the question is this. If the traditional nation state, the whole structure we've inherited, is failing, what do you do?
Exactly. What if the solution isn't to fight for change from the inside, but to just leave? To build a new country governed by code, starting entirely in the cloud.
That's the ultimate tension we're unpacking. It's the classic framework of voice versus exit.
Right.
Voice is that difficult, often messy, grinding work of fixing old institutions. Voting, protesting, even revolution.
And kicks.
Exit is the radical idea that if the system is just too broken, you don't owe it your loyalty. You find your tribe and you build your own bespoke society somewhere else.
And the architect of this incredibly detailed blueprint for exit is Balaji Srinivasan. He's a technologist, a hugely successful investor, a bit of a prophet, and I think it's fair to say an absolute provocateur.
Oh, absolutely. He's proposing this step-by-step methodology for building what he calls the network state.
A concept that wants to leverage crypto and decentralized identity to create sovereign nations that are, literally born online before they ever even touch physical ground.
So our mission today is to give you a real deep dive into this radical vision. We're going to examine Balaji's foundation, his technical background, the philosophy driving him.
We'll trace the mechanics. How does a network state supposedly grow from, a simple online forum into a recognized geopolitical player?
And maybe most importantly, we have to neutrally present the powerful, really intense pushback this idea is getting, which ranges from, severe practical reality checks all the way to profound accusations of techno-colonialism.
This is a high-stakes discussion about the future of global governance. It really forces you to ask yourself, would you ditch all this chaos for a country in the cloud?
We're going to give you all the context you need to understand why this idea resonates so deeply with people who feel legacy systems are obsolete, and why so many others see it as the ultimate expression of an exclusionary corporate utopianism.
Let's unpack this.
To really appreciate the sheer scale of the network state idea, you first have to understand the person proposing it. Balaji Srinivasan is not some fringe commentator.
No, not at all.
He's a system builder. He's operated the highest levels of tech, finance, and even biotech.
That's the perfect starting point. Let's just unpack his academic background because it's genuinely exceptional and it points directly to his way of thinking.
He has 4 degrees from Stanford.
4, a BS, an MS, and a PhD in electrical engineering, plus a whole separate MS in chemical engineering.
And that combination is so critical because it spans the digital, code and electronics and the physical, chemical processes, biotech.
He's not just a software guy.
Exactly. He's not just a brilliant coder. He understands complex, regulated physical systems. And that's vital when you're talking about building a new state from scratch.
And this background allowed him to move right into entrepreneurship in these heavily regulated fields. His first huge success was co-founding Counsel.
Right, the genetic testing company.
Counsel pioneered screening for Mendelian diseases in parents-to-be, operating deep inside the whole FDA and medical regulatory world.
And it was eventually acquired for $375 million, which proved he could innovate and scale within those traditional, often really slow-moving institutional lines.
After that, he really moved to the center of the Silicon Valley ecosystem, became a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz,
One of the most powerful VC firms on the planet.
where he focused specifically on crypto. At the same time, he co-founded 21 Inc., which is a Bitcoin mining company that later pivoted.
And that pivot is interesting. It created Earn.com,
Right.
which paid users in crypto for doing small, verifiable digital tasks. It was basically a microeconomy governed entirely by code.
So when Coinbase acquired Earn.com in 2018, Balaji became the exchange's first ever chief technology officer.
Which put him right at the intersection of institutional finance and decentralized digital money. What a unique vantage point on global power structures.
And his influence goes way back. He was one of MIT Technology Review's Innovators Under 35 back in 2013.
Right. So he has the technical success, the investment insight, and the institutional understanding to give serious credibility to what might otherwise sound like, political fantasy.
And all of that background feeds directly into the philosophical engine of the network state, this framework of exit, voice, and loyalty.
Yeah, this comes from a really important 1970 political science book by Albert O. Hirschman.
Exit, voice, and loyalty.
The framework basically says that when any organization or system starts to decline, it network. It's inefficient, corrupt, ossified. Its members have two primary options.
And the first one, which I think is most people's instinct, is voice.
Voice is participation. It's trying to fix the organization's decline from the inside. That could be anything from, a full-blown revolution to just voting, lobbying, protesting.
It's the work of reform.
And it's often slow, requires consensus, and there's absolutely no guarantee it'll work.
So the alternative, which is the foundation of Srinivasan's entire project, is exit.
Exit is just deciding to leave the failing system. It's when an individual or a group decides the system's trajectory can't be changed, or that the effort just isn't worth the potential reward.
So the argument is, if your preferences are totally incompatible with the existing system, real progress comes from starting something new.
Not from fighting the old one, yeah.
But, isn't that a luxury? Relying purely on exit seems like something only available to the successful. What about people who just can't afford to leave?
That is the central critique, and we'll get into it.
Yep.
But Srinivasan's counterargument, his justification for exit as an engine of progress, is the startup analogy. He says even a company founded on pure libertarian autonomy, say, a single founder, eventually scales. And when it scales, it inevitably rebuilds the state.
Meaning it creates its own bureaucracy.
Exactly. You get HR, legal compliance, processes. The company goes from a collection of individuals to this multicellular, regulated organism.
And when that organism gets too slow or too constrained?
The most ambitious people don't stay to fix the HR manual. They exit. They leave to start the next, leaner, more innovative company. He argues progress in tech is fundamentally driven by this aggressive cycle of exit.
And he just wants to apply that same pressure to politics.
He wants to apply it to governance itself. And this preference for exit is then backed up by a really aggressive technological thesis from the 1997 book, The Sovereign Individual.
He calls that book a prophecy.
Repeatedly. The book argues we're in the final phase of the state's dominance, and it's all driven by technology.
And the core shift here is about property and violence. How does digital currency change that relationship?
Historically, states had a monopoly on violence, which they used to enforce property rights, but also to extract wealth. If you owned land, they could tax it. Cash, they could seize it or inflate it away.
Your property was physically vulnerable.
But cryptography, they argue, completely changes the geometry of power.
No amount of violence can solve a math problem.
That's the quote. That is the core takeaway. A government can try to torture you to get your private keys, but the keys themselves are just an abstract mathematical concept. It's incredibly hard to seize cryptocurrency held in a self-custodied wallet.
Unlike a bank account.
Totally different. This portability and unseizability of wealth means that wealth creators can, in theory, keep what they create, bypassing the state's old methods of extraction.
So the implication, according to the sovereign individual, is a complete shift in how state conflicts work.
Yes. The idea is, if governments can't easily seize wealth, they can't easily fund massive national wars, like a World War I or II, which required total mobilization of a country's resources through taxes and debt.
So the prediction is a world with maybe fewer huge wars,
but more petty, hard-to-track digital and localized crime. Because criminals also benefit from this new tech. The logic of violence itself gets defunded at the macro-state level.
Now, despite this very technical, libertarian philosophy, Balaji has had these moments of very public political engagement.
Oh, absolutely. His highest profile moment was being considered for FDA commissioner back in 2017 under the Trump administration.
Which was a huge moment because he was being considered to lead the very system he so often criticizes as being slow and broken.
And he showed his cards right away. The first thing he did was delete a massive archive of his old, often very critical tweets.
Including one that really summed up his whole critique of regulation. For every thalidomide, many dead from slowed approvals.
Right. It highlights his deep belief that institutional risk aversion, like you see at the FDA, actually has this massive hidden cost. It delays life-saving innovations.
And we also have to talk about the most high-profile public controversy. The $1 million Bitcoin bet in early 2023.
That was pure provocation. He staked $1 million that Bitcoin would hit $1 million within 90 days, driven by hyperinflation in the U.S.
Which he believed was imminent.
He conceded the bet early, paid out a portion of it, but the whole thing served as a lightning rod for his bigger economic thesis, that the fiat system is on the verge of collapse and Bitcoin is the only lifeboat.
And even though the bet didn't pan out in that 90-day window, the sheer scale of it cemented his image as this aggressive prognosticator of systemic collapse.
And finally, his willingness to get into social media fights, criticizing journalists, suggesting some activists were sociopaths. It shows he sees this conflict as personal and necessary.
He sees legacy institutions as adversaries.
He does. So this background, a technical genius who believes the current system is collapsing and sees his critics as enemies, it sets the stage perfectly for proposing the ultimate solution, the network state.
Okay, so given this background of deep institutional distrust, the network state makes a kind of logical sense as his answer. But let's move past the philosophy and look at the engineering. How do you actually build a country in the cloud?
The core insight is that this is a cloud-first revolution. It completely inverts the historical process of how states were formed.
Right. Every successful state in history, from city-states to empires, was land first.
They seized territory, established borders, fought to defend them, and only then did they start writing laws and developing a national consciousness, usually based on shared geography or ethnicity.
The network state just skips all that initial physical conflict.
It begins with code and community. It aligns people purely on shared values, not on who happens to live next door. It's a community based on voluntary, values-driven self-selection.
So let's define it precisely. What are the critical ingredients of a network state?
First, it's a social network with a single compelling moral purpose and an agreed-upon leader, a founder figure.
Second, it needs an integrated cryptocurrency. That's its internal economy and governance token.
Third, it needs a real sense of national consciousness and a proven ability for collective crowdfunding.
And the fourth piece, the jump to the physical world.
It needs a portfolio of globally distributed, physically inhabited territories. Srinivasan calls it an archipelago.
Then archipelago, so like small parcels of land, houses, co-working spaces, scattered across the globe, but all stitched together by the network.
Exactly. And the final goal is to leverage that economic and demographic scale to get formal diplomatic recognition.
That idea of an archipelago is fascinating. Islands of aligned ideology, digitally connected, running on a shared OS. But how do you get from, a Discord server to a seat at the UN? He lays out 7 specific milestones.
He does. And the journey starts purely in the digital world. Milestone 1 is building a founding community around that moral purpose, a really tight-knit, values-aligned group.
And then that community organizes itself. Milestone 2.
Organizing it as a network union. Think of it like formalizing the social network with a charter, some initial governance.
The third stage feels critical because it's about proving it actually works.
Milestone 3. Demonstrating collective action. They have to do something difficult together, build a huge piece of open source software, raise capital for a public good, something that proves the network is a functioning entity, not just a chat room.
And once that's proven, they move to finance.
Milestone 4. Crowdfund financing territory. This is run just like a startup's Series A. Members pool crypto into a fund to start buying those initial parcels of land around the world.
They buy where it's cheap and the legal environment is friendly.
And then comes the moment of physical materialization. Milestone 5. Achieving de facto jurisdiction over that land.
De facto meaning in practice.
In practice, yeah. Not yet recognized by international law, that's de jure. But they govern themselves locally with their own code and smart contracts. They might nest inside an existing legal structure, like a nonprofit or as a tenant in a special economic zone, but they enforce their own rules internally.
And that scale, that proven self-governance, leads to milestone 6, negotiating recognition with legacy states.
Leveraging their population, their assets, and sympathy from other network states or friendly nations.
And finally, milestone 7, achieving strategic parity with legacy states. This whole process is what he calls reverse secession.
You start borderless, you minimize physical conflict, and you only negotiate for autonomy after you've already proven your viability.
But the whole project really rests on that foundational premise, the one commandment.
Right. His argument is that legacy states are too broad. They try to do hundreds of things at once, and it leads to political paralysis. The network state has to have a single, crystalline, non-negotiable principle.
And that one commandment serves 2 purposes. First, it's a filter, ensuring only people who are truly aligned will join.
And second, it's an external measurable metric of success, of legitimacy.
Give us some concrete examples of what these commandments might look like.
Okay, so you can have a state focused purely on quantified health, the only goal. Guarantee every citizen a 10-year lifespan increase using advanced diagnostics and personalized medicine.
Or a state dedicated to radical privacy, where the Constitution just outlaws data hoarding by companies or governments.
Or even a state focused on carbon negativity, where all its operations have to sequester more CO2 than they emit, and it's all verifiable on-chain.
These are clear, definable, measurable goals. But that brings us back to legitimacy. If this is all distributed and digital, how do banks or insurers trust the numbers? They can't just take their word for it.
And that's solved through what he calls the certificate of existence.
Okay.
He argues that legacy states rely on centralized ministries of truth. A ministry of finance tells you the debt level. A census bureau tells you the population, all of which can be manipulated.
The certificate of existence is designed to bypass that need for trust.
Precisely. It's inspired by Bitcoin's Block Explorer, which shows everything transparently. The certificate is a cryptographically signed, time-stamped, public record published daily on the blockchain, detailing the state's key metrics.
Its census, its financials, its map, its compliance with the One Commandment.
So if a network state claims it has 100,000 citizens and $500 million in assets, an external observer, like the IMF, doesn't have to call a minister. They just check the immutable on-chain record. It's transparency replacing political faith.
And this creates competition.
The whole long-term vision is an ecosystem of multiple network states, all interlinked via smart contracts for trade, defense, arbitration, migration.
The digital Hanseatic League.
Yes, and that competition creates evolutionary pressure. States with high taxes, bad governance, or ones that fail their one commandment will see their population and assets flee almost instantly to a competitor. Governance becomes a product, subject to transparent market forces.
The ambition of all this, creating transparent, competitive governance, it really hinges on a parallel revolution, transforming how we trust information. Without verifiable data, the certificate of existence is basically worthless.
Yeah, Balaji argues that our whole global system is bottlenecked by what he calls fiat information.
Okay, what does he mean by that?
Just like fiat currency is only backed by government trust, fiat information relies entirely on argument from authority. We're forced to believe data just because some centralized prestige institution, a major newspaper, a government agency, an elite university, says it's true.
And the problem is when that institution fails, the whole information system collapses with it.
And that failure was on full display during major crises. He points to COVID-19 as the perfect example, where information failed at every single level.
Right.
The raw scientific data was often wrong, the reporting from media was often biased, and the resulting official policy, the regulation was just disastrously slow or misguided.
So the paradigm shift has to be toward what he calls crypto information.
Absolutely. The model shifts from trusting an authority, his shorthand is BTC over NYT, to relying on verifiable proof. The goal is data that is audited, where every step of the supply chain is tracked cryptographically.
But to do that, you need a system that can reliably bring real-world off-chain data onto the blockchain in a trusted way. And this is the role of oracles and advocates.
Let's use an analogy. Imagine the system is a stock market. The blockchain is the final ledger where all the trades are recorded.
Okay, so if the blockchain is the ledger, what's the oracle?
The oracles are the off-chain entities. They could be sensors, auditing firms, human experts, machines. They provide cryptographically signed assertions. They are the market data feed. They assert the verifiable fact, like the current price of a stock or a sensor reading of river's pollution level. It's raw, verifiable data.
And the advocates.
The advocates are the humans or machines that write the narrative on top of that verifiable data. In our stock market analogy, the oracle provides the verified trade price, and the advocate is the financial news anchor giving the analysis. The market is reacting positively to this new price.
And that separation is key. You can check the raw, cryptographically signed data from the oracle, the fact, even if you completely disagree with the advocate's interpretation.
It dramatically increases transparency and reduces the risk of malicious narrative control. And this concept gets generalized into what he calls the ledger of record. The ledger is meant to be a universal, constantly updated, machine-readable feed of financial facts and assertions. It's generalizing the trust of the Bitcoin blockchain to cover way more than just currency transactions.
So it's basically replacing traditional wire services like Reuters or the AP with a globally accessible, decentralized, and auditable data feed.
Yes, and by using decentralized tech, you expand what can be reliably verified. New kinds of proofs, proof of location, proof of solvency, proof of identity, can all be put on the chain. This enables new kinds of verifiable research, political polling, public health reporting that's censorship-resistant and incorruptible at the data level.
The theory is solid, but where do you start? He needs a killer app, a use case to prove that this crypto information system is better than the fiat one.
He says the perfect first application is measuring inflation. He calls it the inflation test bed.
Why inflation specifically? Why not election monitoring or climate data?
Because inflation is politically sensitive, it's hugely important to everyone's wallet, but it's mathematically manageable. He suggests that just as there was official misinformation on COVID, the official misinformation on inflation, manipulated CPI figures, is either happening or about to become unavoidable.
So if the state is incentivized to report lower inflation numbers than reality, a decentralized alternative becomes politically and economically necessary.
Exactly. And this project, creating a decentralized inflation dashboard, a shadow statistics alternative, is the perfect test bed because it unites every single part of the crypto ecosystem.
You need Bitcoin as the hedge against the fiat collapse that's supposedly driving this hyperinflation.
You need decentralized apps and smart contracts for the calculations. And crucially, you need the oracles, like Chainlink, for reliably reporting real-world price data for goods and services across all major markets.
So the idea is, if the crypto community can demonstrably nail the inflation number better than the state's official metrics,
Providing a dashboard that's refreshed millions of times a day with real-time auditable data.
that proves they can be trusted to nail other complex national numbers, like revenue or corporate accounting or health statistics. It's the ultimate proof of concept for verifiable governance.
The network state is often incorrectly dismissed as just an online gaming community or some glorified chat room.
But the ultimate ambition is physical. It's about using digital leverage and collective alignment to innovate in the creation of actual physical cities and polities.
Right. The goal is not to stay online. The goal is to materialize the governance model onto land, bypassing the stagnation of current regulatory environments. He has this whole detailed blueprint for a digital-first city, designed to start with almost $0.
And the steps are all about minimizing upfront risk.
First, you build the community and its economy digitally, all organized around remote work. Second, laws are enforced entirely through smart contracts and digital arbitration.
And the third step integrates technology in a really fascinating way, simulating the architecture in VRR.
Before a single shuttle ever touches the ground, the entire city is built in the metaverse. You should be able to walk around your future city, see your apartment, debate the layout of public squares, all in virtual reality.
And that allows for super rapid iteration and testing of urban planning before you commit massive capital.
Precisely. And that virtual blueprint then gives the community immense financial leverage when it's time to materialize.
They crowdfund territory, but they're leveraging the massive global difference in construction costs. Building the exact same building can cost 10x, even 100x more in Silicon Valley than in an emerging economy.
The network state maximizes that arbitrage. They acquire these small distributed parcels, the archipelago, and they materialize the city based on the tested digital blueprint. The thesis is that innovation in atoms, in physical structures, is only possible now if you first innovate deeply in bytes.
A huge part of the advantage the network state claims to have over traditional cities is its ability to engineer a unifying identity right from the start.
Yeah, traditional cities are just geographic. You might share absolutely nothing but a tax rate with your neighbor.
The network state is built around voluntary, deep alignment.
New cities have to coalesce around a unifying identity, or they just risk becoming another messy, politically divided legacy state. Srinivasan argues the most successful ones will be intensely intentional communities based on deep lifestyle demands.
Give us some examples of these intentional communities.
Okay, think about designing an entire city to be completely vegan. All food production, all commerce adheres to that one principle. Or a town optimized entirely for a specific fitness lifestyle, like CrossFit or biohacking.
Or even a community built solely around a highly specific artistic or religious practice.
Right. This creates intense, non-negotiable alignment among the people there.
And this non-negotiable alignment is organized through what he calls the identity stack.
People often feel nationalistic about their companies, their sports teams, their crypto, not just their country. The identity stack is just the hierarchy of those loyalties for a given person. The thing at the very top of that stack is this single, non-negotiable principle they align with.
So for people where the network state's moral mission, veganism, privacy, biohacking is at the very top of their stack, those are the most dedicated citizens.
They're the community leaders. They're the people who become the mayor by acclamation because their dedication to the founding principle is just unquestioned. and that alignment promises high trust and very low internal friction.
And this community cohesion is sustained even before they buy land by creating a frictionless digital workforce. This is the idea of exit in place.
This is tapping right into the original vision of his startup, Earn.com, but scaling it globally. The idea is to let workers exit their national systems and compensation biases without physically moving.
So a highly skilled person in, say, Nigeria can log on to a global merit-based feed of tasks and get paid immediately in crypto.
And this overcomes massive issues with national boundaries, currency instability, and the compliance nightmare of traditional global payroll.
So the worker physically stays where they are, they exit in place, but they are paid, governed economically, and connected socially by the crypto-native system.
They're no longer bound by the economic fate of their host nation.
But to enable the deep physical innovation for these cities, Srinivasan believes legacy regulations have to be bypassed, which leads to his strong call for special innovation zones, or SEZs.
He argues that excessive risk aversion is the greatest risk of all, especially when it's combined with regulatory capture.
So he advocates for these special innovation zones, which are geographically marked areas, kind of like FAA drone zones or financial regulatory sandboxes.
The purpose isn't chaos. It's to create spaces where innovation can happen at startup speed, away from the calcified bureaucracy of legacy regulators like the FDA.
The ultimate goal here is autonomy.
Yes, autonomy for a willing doctor, willing patient, over experimental procedures, like advanced gene editing with CRISPR. He argues that by slowing down life-saving biotech, the U.S. is falling behind countries like China, which may not have the same ethical constraints, but they move faster. SEZs are designed to keep the network states competitive.
The most compelling example he gives for regulatory failure involves the FDA and the Apple Watch.
It's a devastating critique. He argues that the FDA's years-long delay in approving basic diagnostics in the Apple Watch meant that by early 2020, we lacked a distributed diagnostic network that could have detected COVID outbreaks days in advance through population health data.
The regulatory lag crippled the public health response in those critical early stages.
The takeaway is clear. Our current conservative risk profile, which demands decades of testing, means we pay this immense risk-averse premium. We delay innovation, only to have all that accumulated risk crash down in one massive event, like a pandemic or a financial crisis.
And this urgency to exit is really driven by a deep pessimism he has about the trajectory of the U.S., which he thinks is in a state of terminal decline.
He draws a direct analogy between the modern U.S. and the dysfunctional India of his youth. Full of brilliant people, but politically paralyzed, unable to build consensus or execute large projects.
He famously said they can't even build a small building in California, let alone agree on national policy.
And he predicts an exponential rise in emigration. Over 1 million people leaving the U.S. within the next decade, which will just accelerate the decline.
And he emphasizes this isn't just the ultra-rich buying their bunkers, it's immigrants re-emigrating, and crucially, remote workers, digital nomads seeking a lower cost of living overseas.
As he argues, you emigrate because you're not rich, because you want to save money. Yeah. To him, this search for a better, more viable life elsewhere is the most rational, most fundamental human impulse. Okay, so we've established the philosophical appeal and, the technical feasibility of the network state blueprint, but an idea this radical, one that proposes abandoning millennia of political structure, is going to generate intense, often moral opposition.
And that opposition needs to be understood just as deeply as the blueprint itself.
The first major critique frames the whole project as a form of exploitation, often called techno-colonialism.
Right. Philosophers like Slavoj Žižek and others argue that this pursuit of regulatory arbitrage, it looks a lot like the tactics of historical corporate entities.
Specifically comparing it to the Dutch East India Company. These were entities that carved out autonomous, profit-driven zones, leveraging their financial and tech superiority to operate in host nations without accepting any of the moral obligations of citizenship or democratic accountability.
So the critique is that the network state just uses technology to get privileged access to low-cost land and low-regulation environments in poorer countries, effectively creating a modern high-tech plantation model.
And the ideological context from critics gets even more severe. They link this exit philosophy, shared by Srinivasan, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, to a broader movement that they call end-times fascism.
And we have to be really clear and neutral here. Critics characterize this ideology as, and this is a quote, monstrous supremacist survivalism.
The core of this critique is that these figures anticipate a civilizational collapse, from climate change, inequality, AI, whatever, And they are not preparing solutions for society.
No, they're preparing fortressed escape pods for the elite.
Exactly. These havens, physical or digital, are envisioned as hyper-capitalist, democracy-free zones where the wealthy can thrive while the rest of the world descends into chaos.
So critics see the network state as this exclusionary political vehicle. It's secession for the privileged few who prioritize technological optimization over shared human existence.
Beyond the political framing, the network state faces this deep philosophical critique about the very purpose of founding a state. Is it just a prudential activity, or is it fundamentally a moral activity?
Okay, the prudential view, which aligns with the network state, sees the state as a rational compromise, a mechanism to maximize your self-interest, protect property, satisfy your immediate desires. You choose the state product that offers the best utility for the lowest fee.
But the moral view argues that state founding is inherently a moral endeavor. It's about establishing cooperative social practices that promote the well-being of citizens. To do it purely for financial gain or tech optimization, that commits what's called modal confusion.
Modal confusion. That is dense philosophical jargon. We need to break that down.
Think of it like this. If your job is to be a doctor, but you spend all your time optimizing the hospital's accounting software, you've confused the means with the end.
Okay.
The principal end of the state is human flourishing and citizen autonomy, not maximizing profit. Confusing state-making for irrelevant ends, like financial gain, is the core confusion.
And this leads to the critical distinction between maximizing the satisfaction of immediate desires and promoting genuine autonomy.
Precisely. The core argument is that consent alone doesn't make a state ethical. A state's true moral purpose must be promoting its citizens' autonomy. And to do that, you have to distinguish between two dimensions of subjectivity.
The first is the quantitative dimension of subjectivity, your ability to satisfy immediate first-order desires. Do you want pizza? Can you buy pizza? The network state is great at protecting this freedom.
But the more important dimension is the qualitative dimension of subjectivity. This is your capacity for critical reflection and deliberative choice. It's the ability to sit back and reflect on which desires are worthy, why you want pizza, and if focusing on pizza is preventing you from some deeper, more meaningful goal.
So if a network state just optimizes your ability to satisfy your immediate desires without helping you develop the capacity to reflect on them, the critique says it fails its moral purpose. It turns citizens into consumers, not self-governing moral agents.
And finally, we just have to confront the cold reality checks. The overlooked physical requirements for sovereignty. The cloud-first model fundamentally discounts the physical world.
You can't govern a city with code if the water supply fails. What are the non-negotiable physical requirements that are often overlooked here?
First and foremost, self-sustaining agricultural production. Network states envision this global, interconnected economy, but people are physical beings with physical needs. Relying entirely on fragile global supply chains for food and water in a crisis is a recipe for collapse. A stable nation needs to be able to feed its own people.
Second, the sheer need for adequate natural resources for construction and maintenance.
Building a city, even a small one, requires concrete, steel, timber, manufacturing capacity. These things are tied to geology. Digital blueprints can't conjure up building supplies when global markets seize up.
And third, the vulnerability of internal supply chains.
We saw this with the Texas energy crisis and the early pandemic shortages. A highly optimized digital code base is useless if the underlying essential infrastructure, electricity, water, sanitation, physical security breaks down.
So the critique is that Balaji is trying to manage the state like an app.
But he fails to appreciate that the state is fundamentally a physical body of human beings, existing in space and time, requiring things like food, water, and moral frameworks.
This has been an exhaustive deep dive into one of the most intellectually compelling and I think politically divisive concepts of the decade. We started with the intense ideological appeal of exit, rooted in Balaji Srinivasan's technical genius and his critique of the obsolete state.
We meticulously detailed the network state blueprint. That journey from a decentralized community with its one commandment, verified by the certificate of existence, all the way to its physical manifestation as a competitive global archipelago.
And we had to confront the powerful critiques, ranging from the philosophical argument that state-making is a moral pursuit, not a financial problem, to the severe political accusation that this whole movement is a form of utopian colonialism for a privileged elite.
And the central tension here remains absolutely clear. The network state is this meticulously engineered response to perceived institutional failure. It forces us to ask whether technology, crypto, decentralized identity, verifiable information can truly bypass these dysfunctional legacy systems.
Or if this pursuit of optimized, bespoke, voluntary governance just accelerates a different kind of fragmentation and conflict in the physical world.
The key takeaway for you, the learner, is that the existence of this detailed blueprint, whether you agree with it or not, forces us to confront fundamental questions about where our deepest loyalties should lie in the 21st century.
Is it to the geography you inhabit, to the legacy government that imposes taxes and laws? Or is it to the shared digital values, the aligned identity, and the immutable code that define your self-selected tribe?
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. We are constantly being given immense power by technology, the power to communicate, to transact, to align globally. But if that power is primarily used to exit problems rather than to stay and solve them, what essential responsibilities do we forfeit to the physical world, to the crumbling infrastructure, the shared atmosphere, and the people we leave behind? And who, in the end, is left to manage the ensuing chaos?